On March 21, 2007, somewhere in the Al-Anbar province of Iraq, a 20-year-old Marine was sitting with his dog. Just sitting. The sun was going down. The heat was finally breaking. For a brief moment, in the middle of one of the most dangerous places on Earth, things were quiet. The Marine's name was Dustin Lee. The dog's name was Lex. They had been together for months. They had walked the same roads, slept in the same dirt, shared the same meals, breathed the same dust. In a place where everything was designed to kill you, they had each other. And that was enough. Then a rocket came. It hit their position without warning. The explosion ripped through the air. Shrapnel tore in every direction. When the dust settled and the ringing in everyone's ears began to fade, the medics rushed in. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Dustin Lee, 20 years old, someone's son, someone's brother, someone's best friend, was lying on the ground, mortally wounded. He would not survive. But Lex was still there. The dog had taken shrapnel across his entire body. He was bleeding from multiple wounds. He was hurt. He was in pain. And he would not move. He was lying right next to Dustin, pressed against him, his head resting on the young Marine's chest. Not whimpering. Not running. Just staying. The way he always had. The way he always would. And when the medics tried to help Dustin, they realized they had a problem. The dog wouldn't let them near the body. Not out of aggression. Out of love. He was protecting his handler, even though his handler was already gone. Lex wasn't born for war. He was bred for it, a purebred German Shepherd, sharp, fast, and loyal to a fault. He was trained at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, the same facility that has produced military working dogs for the United States Armed Forces for decades. From the beginning, Lex stood out. He was intense. Focused. He didn't just follow commands, he anticipated them. The trainers said he had something you couldn't teach. An instinct. A drive. A need to be close to his handler at all times. But a military dog without a handler is just a dog in a kennel. And Lex went through the early stages of his training waiting for the one person who would become his entire world. The one person he would follow into hell without hesitation. He didn't know it yet. But that person was a kid from Mississippi who had just turned 19. A kid named Dustin Lee. When Corporal Dustin Lee was assigned as Lex's handler, something clicked immediately. The trainers noticed it. The other Marines noticed it. Lex, who had been reserved and cautious around previous handlers, suddenly came alive. He followed Dustin everywhere. Not because he was ordered to. Because he wanted to. Dustin had a way with him. He talked to Lex like he was a person. He shared his food with him. He let Lex sleep beside him instead of in a separate area. Their commanding officer once joked that it was hard to tell who was the handler and who was the dog. They were inseparable. And when the orders came to deploy to Iraq in 2006, Dustin didn't flinch. He knew where he was going. And he knew Lex would be right beside him. What he didn't know was that only one of them would come home alive. Al-Anbar province was one of the deadliest places on Earth in 2007. It was the heartland of the Iraqi insurgency, a place where improvised explosive devices lined every road, snipers watched every rooftop, and rocket attacks could come from anywhere at any time. Dustin and Lex worked as an explosive detection team. Their job was to walk ahead of the patrol and find the bombs before the bombs found the Marines. Every single day, Dustin Lee put his life on the line. And every single day, Lex walked beside him, nose to the ground, searching for the scent of death buried in the dirt. They were good at their job. They saved lives. Marines who walked behind Dustin and Lex knew they had a better chance of going home because of that team. But on March 21, 2007, no amount of training could have saved them. The rocket came without warning. There was no time to react. No time to take cover. No time to say goodbye. The explosion hit their position directly. Shrapnel ripped through the air like 1,000 burning knives. Dustin Lee took the worst of it. He was hit in places his body armor couldn't protect. The medics were there within minutes, but they already knew. The wounds were too severe. Corporal Dustin Lee, 20 years old, from Quitman, Mississippi, was gone. Lex was hit too. Shrapnel had torn into his back, his legs, his sides. He was bleeding from wounds across his entire body. But he was alive. Barely. And he wasn't going anywhere. When the medics reached Dustin's position, they expected chaos. They expected screaming. They expected panic. What they found was silence. Lex was lying beside Dustin, pressed so close against him that the medics initially thought the dog was dead too. He wasn't moving. He wasn't making a sound. He was just there. His head on Dustin's chest. His eyes open. Watching. Waiting. The first medic to approach knelt down and reached for Dustin. Lex didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply shifted his body, just enough to block the medic's hands. Not aggressive. Just protective. The message was clear. You're not taking him from me. They tried again. This time, two medics approached from different sides. Lex turned his head back and forth, tracking both of them, his body still pressed against Dustin. They could see the shrapnel wounds on the dog's body. Blood matting his fur. A piece of metal still lodged in his hindquarters. He was in serious pain. And he didn't care. He wasn't leaving. It took multiple Marines to physically lift Lex off of Dustin's body. They had to carry the dog away, not because he was too injured to walk, but because he refused to walk away. Even as they carried him, Lex kept his eyes locked on Dustin. He watched until they were out of sight. And even then, the Marines who were there said Lex kept trying to turn back. Kept pulling toward where Dustin was. The military veterinarians who treated Lex later said something that broke everyone who heard it. They said they had seen a lot of wounded dogs. Dogs in pain. Dogs in shock. But they had never seen a dog grieve. Until Lex. Lex wasn't just injured. He was heartbroken. Lex was medevaced to a military veterinary facility where surgeons spent hours removing shrapnel from his body. Pieces of metal were pulled from his back, his legs, his shoulders. One fragment had come dangerously close to his spine. Another had barely missed a major artery. The surgeons were amazed he had survived at all. But physically, Lex recovered. Within weeks, his wounds were healing. His body was getting stronger. The scars were forming. But something else wasn't healing. The veterinary staff reported that Lex had changed. He was withdrawn. He wouldn't eat unless someone sat with him. He didn't respond to commands the way he used to. He would lie in his kennel for hours, staring at the door, as if he was waiting for someone to walk through it. Someone who was never coming back. The behavioral specialists tried everything. New handlers. New routines. New environments. Nothing worked. Lex would cooperate just enough to get through the day, but the fire that had made him one of the best working dogs in the program was gone. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't disobedient. He was just empty. Meanwhile, 8,000 miles away in Quitman, Mississippi, a family was burying their son. Jerome and Rachel Lee had received the notification that every military family dreads: the knock on the door, the officers in dress uniforms, the words that stop your heart. Their boy was gone. 20 years old. Their youngest. The one who used to make everyone laugh. The one who had begged them to let him join the Marines. The one who wrote home about his dog almost as much as he wrote about the war. Dustin's letters home were full of Lex. He wrote about how Lex would steal his pillow. How Lex would sit on his feet during briefings. How Lex was the one thing in Iraq that made him feel like everything was going to be okay. Rachel Lee had kept every single letter. And now, with her son gone, those letters were all she had left. Almost all she had left. Because somewhere on a military base, Lex was still alive. The dog that her son had loved more than anything was still out there. Still breathing. Still waiting for a handler who would never come. And Rachel Lee made a decision. She wanted Lex. She wanted to bring him home. She wanted to give him the life that Dustin would have given him if he had survived. She wanted Lex to sleep in Dustin's room. To lie on Dustin's bed. To be surrounded by the scent and the memory of the boy who had loved him most. But when she called the Marine Corps to ask about adopting Lex, she was told something that felt like a second punch to the heart. No. The answer was no. Military working dogs are government property. They cannot be adopted out while they are still fit for service. And despite his emotional state, Lex was still physically capable. His wounds had healed. His body was strong. And as far as the military was concerned, Lex still had years of service left. Rachel Lee had just lost her son. And now the military was telling her she couldn't have his dog. What followed was a battle that nobody expected. A battle that wasn't fought with weapons or explosions, but with letters, phone calls, petitions, and a mother's refusal to give up. Rachel Lee didn't accept no for an answer. She couldn't. She had already lost her son. She was not going to lose his dog too. She started making phone calls. First to the Marine Corps, then to the Department of Defense, then to local news stations, then to anyone who would listen. She told Dustin's story. She told Lex's story. She told the story of a dog who was so devoted to her son that he had to be physically carried away from his body. She told the story of a dog who was sitting in a kennel somewhere, grieving, waiting for a handler who was buried in Mississippi. And she asked one simple question that no one in the military could answer without looking heartless. Why can't I bring my son's dog home? The story hit local news first, then regional outlets, then national. Within weeks, the story of Dustin Lee and Lex was everywhere. Newspapers ran front-page features. Television news anchors choked up telling the story on air. Veterans groups rallied behind the family. Dog lovers across America were outraged. Social media, still in its early days in 2007, exploded with support for Rachel Lee. But the military didn't budge. Not at first. The rules were the rules. Military working dogs are classified as equipment. They belong to the government. They serve until they are no longer physically able. And then, and only then, can they be retired and made available for adoption. Lex was still young, still healthy, still physically capable. The fact that he was emotionally destroyed meant nothing on paper. And that's where the politics got ugly. Supporters of the Lee family argued that the military's policy was cruel and outdated. They argued that a dog who had been wounded in combat and who had witnessed the death of his handler deserved compassion, not reassignment. They argued that forcing Lex to work with a new handler, a stranger, was not just unfair to the dog, but potentially dangerous. Critics, and there were some, argued that making exceptions would set a precedent. If every family of a fallen handler could claim their dog, the military working dog program would collapse. Dogs cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to train. They serve for years. They save lives. You can't just give them away because of emotional appeals, no matter how heartbreaking the story. The debate reached Congress. Representative Walter Jones of North Carolina, who represented a district with a large military community, took up the cause personally. He introduced legislation that would allow the Secretary of the Navy to release Lex from service early. It was an unprecedented move. In the entire history of the U.S. military working dog program, no dog had ever been released from active duty because of a congressional action tied to a specific handler's death. But Jones didn't care about precedent. He cared about doing the right thing. The bill faced resistance. Some lawmakers worried about the implications. Some military officials privately opposed it. The bureaucratic machinery of the Department of Defense moved slowly, painfully slowly, while Rachel Lee waited in Mississippi, surrounded by her son's letters, looking at photos of Dustin and Lex together, wondering if the country her son died for would show even the smallest measure of grace. The pressure mounted. More news coverage. More public outcry. More veterans speaking out. More Gold Star families, families who had also lost children in Iraq and Afghanistan, joining the cause. The message was clear and unified. Bring the dog home. And finally, after months of bureaucratic fights, media campaigns, congressional debates, and a mother's relentless determination, the United States Marine Corps made a decision. They let him go. For the first time in the history of the United States military working dog program, a dog was released from active duty not because he was physically unable to serve, but because Congress, the United States Congress, intervened on behalf of a fallen Marine's family. Lex was officially retired from service. The day Rachel Lee drove to the military facility to pick up Lex, she didn't know what to expect. She had never met the dog in person. She had only seen him in photos that Dustin had sent home. Photos of Lex sleeping on Dustin's cot. Photos of Lex eating from Dustin's plate. Photos of Lex sitting on Dustin's feet. She knew this dog through her son's eyes, through her son's words, through her son's love. When they brought Lex out, Rachel dropped to her knees. He was thinner than she expected. His scars were visible, lines of raised tissue across his back and sides where the shrapnel had torn through. His gait was slightly uneven from the injuries that had never fully healed. But his eyes, those deep, dark, intelligent eyes, they were the same eyes she had seen in every photo. The eyes that had looked at her son with absolute devotion. Lex walked up to Rachel slowly. He sniffed her hands. He sniffed her clothes. And then something happened that the people who witnessed it would never forget. Lex pressed his body against Rachel Lee the same way he used to press against Dustin. He leaned into her. He rested his head against her leg. And he exhaled, a long, deep, shuddering breath, as if he had been holding it for months, as if he had been waiting, as if he finally understood that this woman carried the same scent, the same love, the same blood as the boy he had lost. Rachel wrapped her arms around the dog and cried. The military staff who were there cried. Everyone cried. Because in that moment, two broken hearts, a mother who had lost her son and a dog who had lost his handler, found each other. And for the first time since March 21, 2007, something in the world felt right again. Rachel put Lex in the car. She drove him home to Quitman. She walked him through the front door of the house where Dustin grew up. She led him to Dustin's room. And Lex walked in, sniffed the bed, and lay down. He was home. Lex settled into the Lee family home in a way that surprised everyone, especially the people who had said it couldn't work. He slept in Dustin's room every night. Not on the floor. On the bed. Right in the middle, exactly where Dustin used to sleep. Rachel would sometimes stand in the doorway and watch him, this scarred, battle-hardened war dog curled up on her son's pillow, and she would feel something she hadn't felt since March. She would feel close to Dustin again. Lex followed Rachel everywhere. To the kitchen, to the yard, to the mailbox. He sat at her feet when she watched television. He walked beside her when she went to church. He became her shadow in the same way he had been Dustin's shadow in Iraq. The bond was different. It would never be the same as what Lex had with Dustin, but it was real. It was deep. And it was healing. For both of them. The Lee family didn't keep Lex hidden. They shared him with the community. Lex visited schools where Rachel told Dustin's story. He appeared at Veterans Day ceremonies. He visited wounded warriors at VA hospitals. Children would come up and pet him, running their fingers over his scars, and Rachel would tell them that each scar was a story. A story about a young Marine and his dog. A story about sacrifice. A story about a love that not even death could break. Lex became more than a pet. He became a living memorial to Dustin Lee. Every time someone saw him, they remembered. Every time someone touched his scars, they understood. Every time Lex walked into a room, Dustin walked in with him. The case of Lex also changed military policy. His story, and Rachel Lee's fight, helped push legislation that made it easier for families of fallen handlers to adopt their loved one's military working dog. The law was nicknamed Lex's Law by supporters. What had once been impossible was now a pathway. What had once required an act of Congress could now be handled through official channels. Dustin Lee gave his life for his country. And his dog, through his pain, his grief, and his refusal to let go, changed the rules for every military working dog family that came after.